Hi guys, this is just a tutorial on how to customize 3ds Max. That way you can have it set up exactly how you're comfortable with, and how to save all of your preferences and that, as well as a few little tips for how to speed up 3ds Max and make sure that it's using all of the resources that it can. So to start off with, I recommend disabling Aero, which is the Windows 7 and Vista effect of transparent window borders. So as you can see, I've got Aero disabled here, so it's not actually transparent and blurred out like it normally is. The reason for this is that using Aero takes up system resources basically. So by disabling it, it means that 3ds Max can then use the most resources it can. So you should know how to disable it, but I'll just show you anyway. So just right click, personalize, and then under your Windows color, under your basic themes. So originally it will be with the Windows 7 Aero theme. Just scroll down, change it to a Windows 7 basic or classic or whatever you want. Basic at least keeps the nice look still, without being too resource intensive. So yeah, that's the first thing that I recommend, is just to do that. The second thing is, if you've been using 3ds Max for a while now, you may notice that say you're rendering or you're doing a complex physics simulation, anything that's pretty memory intensive for 3ds Max, if you go to another application then try to come back to 3ds Max, sometimes the screen will be whited out, and it's not that 3ds Max has crashed or become unresponsive. It's just that it's using so many system resources that Windows 7 basically puts it in the background and tries not to display it. This can be an issue if you are rendering through 3ds Max itself with the virtual frame buffer, which is like the render preview window, open. And you want to be able to come back to 3ds Max to check what frame it's up to and whatnot, while then being able to switch out to another program. The way that you can disable this is if you just go Start menu and type in Services, and just click on Services there, and this will basically bring up a big window of all the running Windows 7 processes and services. So you've got a big list here, but basically the one that we're looking for is the Desktop Window Manager Session Manager. Really nice name there, Windows. But so yeah, basically if we find that, so that's this one here, the Desktop Window Manager Session Manager. All you have to do is right click and hit stop, and then go into Properties, Startup Type, and change it to Disabled. Hit apply. Okay, now you may have to restart Windows, just depending. When I did it, I'm using this through a virtual machine at the moment, but when I did it on my actual desktop, I had to restart Windows for it to be completely enabled. But basically that's going to stop the white screen. You still get all of your features like arrow snap and all of that, so that's fine. The only thing that you don't get is your little preview window that you normally get on your taskbar. I don't use it anyway, so it doesn't bother me. If that is a big issue for you, then I don't recommend disabling the service. Otherwise, everything else works perfectly fine. And like I said, it means that you don't get that annoying white screen coming up when 3ds Max is doing something processor intensive and you switch it out to another application. So once that's done, you can change your icons, which I just posted a video yesterday about the free clean Autodesk icons pack that I created. So that's just back burner. But yeah, you can see here basically just change the icon and also change the splash screen. So you can do that if you want, if not, completely up to you. Now the first thing that I do basically before I even open 3ds Max is let's go under Autodesk 3ds Max, right click, Properties, Compatibility, and choose run this program as an administrator. Now you do have to have an administrator account, or at least know the login for an administrator account to be able to do this. I just recommend it because I've had issues in the past, and I'm not sure whether it was just based on like bugs with the 3ds Max version or whatever, but I had issues where, you know, certain things wouldn't be allowed to happen just due to file permissions. So I just always right click, run this program as administrator, apply, okay. So that means that we're not going to have any issues. I'm not sure whether it, yeah, it does it for the icons on the desktop as well, sweet as. So yeah, just do that. Now the next part is if you just open up your documents, go to local disk C, Autodesk 3ds Max 2012. Oops, sorry. Local disk C program files. Autodesk 3ds Max 2012. And basically what we're going to look for is install settings, which is here, install settings.ini. It's basically a configuration document. Just double click, open that up, and you'll see down the bottom of this document we have use user profiles equals 1. What I like to do is change that to 0. Now basically what happens with 3ds Max is you have all your settings stored here in local disk C program files, but what 3ds Max does when it first installs is, I'll just open up the file, is if you actually go to your users and just make sure that you are showing hidden files, under app data, local, Autodesk 3ds Max 2012 ENU, you will see that where your personalization settings and whatnot will get saved is actually in this local folder within the user files. I don't like having it set up like that, mainly because if you're trying to track something down, it can be really annoying to try and search, you know, that you'll go into your program files, you'll search there, can't find it, and some people may not even realize, especially because it's hidden under a hidden folder, may not even realize that this folder exists where all your settings are saved. So basically by changing this use user profiles to 0, it's going to tell 3ds Max to put everything, all of your settings and whatnot, back into the program files, so it's not spread out across your system. So once you've changed that to 0, just file, save, close that out, and now for it to kick in and initiate, we need to start 3ds Max. Now like I said, I'm using a virtual machine, so things are going to be a bit slower to load. I apologize for that, but yeah, I'll just pause the video until 3ds Max is loaded. But basically once it's loaded, all you have to do is just load it up that once, close it down, and we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Alright, so yeah, 3ds Max was started up, closed straight out of it. So that's initiated that use user profiles equals 0 setting. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is go back into local disk C program files, Autodesk 3ds Max 2012, and now that all of our user profile settings are stored in our local disk C program files folder, we can access, if you just search for 3ds Max here, which is .ini, open that up just like before, and basically what we want to do is scroll down. Actually we'll just go edit, find, and what we want to do is look for, just put window. So here we've got window state. Now what window state does is we'll just hit enter and add a new setting, which is window order, and there's no space between window and order, but just make sure you put a capital 0 for order, equals 8, and just save that. Now basically what that does is, normally 3ds Max looks like this. So you've got your toolbars up the top here, and this is where your command panel is, and basically when you've got a larger screen resolution, you pretty much have all this excess space that just isn't being used by 3ds Max. So by setting that to by setting window order equals 8, basically what we're telling 3ds Max is to put the command panel above the other toolbars so it fills up this space. So that's what it's going to look like. Basically it means that you've got that much extra space so that you can display more tools, and it's pretty much utilizing your screen resolution to the best possible advantage that you can. So yeah, by setting it like that, and just file save, close that out. Alrighty, I do not recommend doing that if you're using a small screen resolution though, because if you don't have the extra space, then that can cause some issues. So I'll just check what my screen resolution is here. Yep, sweet as. I'll just up it. Apply. Keep changes. Okay. Okay, so once that's done, we just want to fire up 3ds Max and we'll get into customizing the settings within 3ds Max itself. So I'll just pause the video while it loads up. Okay, so here's 3ds Max started up. This is from a fresh install, so basically I'm just showing you starting from scratch. First of all, I like to untick show this welcome screen at startup, just because I don't need it and it annoys me. So once you've done that, just hit close. So the first thing is we're going to do some custom keyboard shortcuts. So if you use Q, W, E, and R to switch between your select object, move, rotate, and scale, you may find that if you keep hitting it toggle, so I'm hitting Q at the moment, you'll see that the selection region actually changes every time you hit Q. Now that I find very annoying. If I want to change the type of selection mode I'm going to use, I will do it manually, because if say you've got the select tool already selected but you don't realize and you hit Q again, it's going to change your selection mode. You'll get this round marquee or whatever it changes to depending on where you are, but that just really annoys me. And the same thing happens with the scale. So say you've already got the scale tool selected and you hit scale again, it changes the scale method. So basically I just like to leave it as default, and if I want to change, I will change it manually. So the first keyboard shortcuts are going to be what we do to fix that. So if you just go under customize user interface, and you will see you get this window here. So first of all, under keyboard, this is where all your keyboard shortcuts and hotkeys are managed. Change from the category from all commands down to selection. And so first of all, we've got key, so Q. So you can see we've got Smart Select here, which is Q. Smart Select is the one that changes the selection region every time you hit it, so I don't like that. So basically I'm just going to remove that. And under Select Object, that's where I'm going to assign the hotkey Q. So that means rather than switching the region, basically once I hit Q, it's just going to go to Select Object. It's not going to change the region. And we'll do that. I'll just change back to all commands. We'll do that for Smart Select and Scale as well. So if we just hit S, oops. Let's see. So yeah, just under all commands, scroll down to Smart Scale. It's got the keyboard shortcut R. Just remove that keyboard shortcut and find Scale, which is, sorry, we'll do Select and Scale, which is this one here, and assign the keyboard shortcut R. Hit assign, done. So now we can close that out, and we're going to now go to Customize Preferences. So we've got quite a few settings to change here. So first of all, under General, we're going to go Scene Undo Levels. We're going to change this to 100,
Now basically what that means is it just increases the amount of undo levels that are stored in memory so that you can go further back if you make any mistakes. But just recommendation not to go too high with this, because it does use up system resources. So don't set it anything too high. 100 I find is perfect. I've never had to go back anywhere near that amount, just because I do incremental saves. But yeah, basically it just means that you've got it there if you need it. Next we're going to, under spinners, so we're going to tick wrap cursor near spinner. Now basically what that does is, instead of like when you're adjusting inputs using the spinners, instead of your cursor wrapping right to the top and the bottom of the screen, it keeps it relative to the spinner, so it keeps it in a small area around the spinner, so you can do quicker adjustments and whatnot. Now I'll turn off, under UI display, I'll turn off display stack collapse warning. Basically that's just when you're collapsing modifiers in the modifier stack. It normally comes up with a warning pretty much telling you that by collapsing it you're not going to have the ability to edit it anymore. I already know that. I don't need a pop-up to tell me every time, so I'll disable that. I like to keep the display topology dependence warning enabled, primarily because when you're working you may not even think about that, so that way when you switch down to a lower modifier, it will tell you, well, whatever changes you do to this, the modifiers above it are dependent on its topology being the same, so you may have to end up changing something, so I just leave that on. I also disable save UI configuration on exit, mainly because if you say you're working on a scene and you need to customize your scale settings or whatever, you have to customize some sort of settings. Once you exit out, it's going to save that and override all of the changes that we're making now. So basically the changes that we're making now are the defaults that we want to start with the scene. So I prefer to, if I make any changes that I want to then keep, I prefer to manually save it out. So I just disable that save UI configuration on exit. Next I like to turn off fixed width text buttons. Basically this means if you're using a custom toolbar, by having this disabled, the button on the toolbar itself will be the full width of whatever text you've typed in to be its display. It just means that the text isn't going to get cut off or anything like that. So that's all for that, for the general tab. Then we'll go under files. Under file handling, in the recent files in file menu, I like to up that to 20. Basically it just means that 3ds Max keeps track of more of the recent files that you've used, so that they're just up in the menu, so that when you try and open a recent file under the menu, you've got a full list of more files that you've already used. Under auto backup, some people like to disable this. It all depends on how you work. If you're worried about accidental crashes and losing your work and that, I'd leave auto backup enabled. But so yeah, I leave mine enabled. The number of auto backup files I up to 10. Basically this means that 3ds Max will save out 10 auto backup files before it overwrites the oldest saved file. So just by increasing it to 10, it means you've got a bit more leeway. Say if you had a crash and the autoback itself got corrupted, it means that you've got a couple more that you can go back to. And the backup interval I like to set to 10 minutes. You can set that to whatever you like. Basically that just works for me. Now I also like to have, under file handling, convert local file paths to relative. Basically what this does is it removes the dependency on exact file location for resources and textures and whatnot in 3ds Max. So for example, if you created a project but then you moved it to a new drive, all your textures would have broken links, so 3ds Max wouldn't know where to look for them. So you'd have to go in and reset all their links to point to the new directory. But by having the convert local file paths to relative on,
it means that 3ds Max uses file paths based on the folder structure itself instead of the actual file path. So as long as you keep the folder structure the same when you're moving the project to a new drive or directory or whatever, you won't have any issues. So yeah, I'd just like to set that. Under viewports, I like to change the, where are we? Under viewport parameters, just tick update background while playing. Basically it just means that if you've loaded in a movie file or an image sequence and set it as your viewport background, as you're moving the time slider, it will animate along with it. Also like to put under mouse control, like to put zoom about mouse point both in perspective and orthographic. Basically what it means is just when you're zooming in using the viewport controls, you'll zoom wherever your cursor is positioned, so it's just a bit quicker to be able to zoom into a certain object that way. I think that might be all for viewports. So now we'll go over to gamma and LUT. I recommend disabling the gamma LUT correction unless you are using and understand completely a linear workflow. I will be doing a tutorial on linear workflow, including what to set up in 3ds Max to get it to work right, what you have to set in your whatever render engine you're using, such as Mental Ray, V-Ray, and Final Render, what file formats to save out to, and take it that step further and show you how to work properly with your linear corrected rendered files in programs which we'll be covering is After Effects, Nuke, and Composite. So keep an eye out for that tutorial. At the moment I'm just going to disable it. Under the help menu, I'd recommend clicking the download button. So change it to local computer network, download the help, and basically what it's going to do is download a local help to your system. And it's extremely useful in situations where you don't have internet access for a certain amount of time, or you prefer not to have your workstation connected permanently to the internet. And I find that it also loads a hell of a lot faster than the actual online help, mainly because I think it's an issue on Autodesks end, but the web page itself for the online help just loads extremely slow. So once you've downloaded it, it's going to install into program files x86, or program files if you're using 32-bit system, Autodesk help 3ds Max 2012 English US, and that's where it will install. So it'll automatically find it once you've installed it, but just got to make sure you change it over to local computer / network. So that's all that we're going to change in the preferences, so just hit OK, and that applies all of that. Next up we're going to change our viewport configuration. So it's just a bit slow. So if you just right click on where it says realistic or whatever shading mode you're in, and hit configure. Now first off, under selection, I'm going to get rid of selection brackets, just because they really annoy me, and I'm going to turn on display selected with edge faces, which just does exactly what it says. And so when you select an object, basically it's showing it with its wireframe on top. The rendering level I'm just going to set to shaded. Realistic is nice, but I find that with shaded, it basically runs a lot faster and it's a lot more responsive. And I find that with realistic mode, when you're modeling an object or anything like that, the shadows can get really quite annoying. So yeah, I just like to set it over to shaded. Now if we go under, let's hit apply to all views. Now if we go under statistics, basically this is when you have, I like to turn on show statistics in active view, which basically means you'll get this little window here telling you how many polygons, how many verts, and your frames per second that your viewport itself is actually running. So under the setup, I like to keep polygon count and vertex count. If you're working in games, triangle count may be a bit more useful for you. And under this part here, where it says total, I like to change it to selection. So basically what it means is this here
like your statistics will only update and show the details for the selected object. If you want to see the details for the whole scene, basically just select everything. But I find it more useful to display it just for the selected object, so that way I can quickly switch between objects and see what their poly counts are. So display, and I think under the view cube, basically I like to disable the view cube because that thing just pisses me off. And then under safe frames, I like to if you want to change your safe frames, you can disable and enable. So I like to have the action safe and the title safe. So just apply OK. And next we're going to go to customize unit setup. Now, unit setup is one of those things that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to. So basically, you've got your unit set up here. A lot of people will just change it to, say they're working in US standard, and they want it in inches. They'll just change it there, not realizing that it doesn't. That's just the way it's displayed in 3ds Max. That doesn't actually change the physical units that it's using. So what I like to do is I just leave under the display unit scale to generic units. Then under system unit setup, that's where you will change it. So by default it's set to inches. I live in Australia, so we use centimeters and meters. So I just change mine to centimeters. Hit OK. Okay, so scale is one of those things. It's mainly when you're working with simulations, like physical simulations, and especially programs like RealFlow and Naiad, that you really want to be careful with your scale and make sure that they match up, so that when you're exporting and importing, everything comes in properly. So once you've done that, I'm going to customize my time configuration, which is this little button down here. So if you just click on that, it brings up this window. Now basically this is just for your animation. Personally for me, for my frame rate, I just set it to film, which is 24 frames per second. The main reason for that is if I'm just rendering out personal projects or animations for myself, 24 frames per second obviously is using less frames than say NTSC, which is I think around about 30 frames per second. So it renders out quicker, and you still get the same motion, like it's what film is recorded and played back at. So I just prefer to use 24 frames per second. Obviously you can change this per project depending on what your output is, but that's just what I like to set it as for default. And I also like to set my animation end time to be 240 frames. Now basically what this means is it's giving me 10 seconds of animation down here on my timeline just to start up with default, so I've got a bit of play room when I'm working in a scene. So just hit OK. Now we'll go up to my render setup, and basically this is just your render settings obviously for when you're rendering out. My output size I like to set to HDTV video. And then with one of these smaller settings here, basically, obviously if I'm doing a final render, it will either be 720p or 180p, but for doing test renders I like something smaller that's a bit quicker to render. So I just right click on whichever one you want to replace, and that way you can configure it yourself. I just set this to 720 by 405, and basically that means that it's something slightly smaller, so that when I'm doing test renders it renders out a lot quicker. And then just scroll down and you can assign renderer. If you find yourself not using scanline very much and you prefer, say you use V-Ray or Final Render or Mental Ray, one of the things that you'll most commonly do when you're starting a new scene is assign the renderer. So if we do it here and save it out correctly, it basically means that it's going to happen automatically for us. So I'm going to just change this over to Mental Ray renderer, hit OK, and there we go. Now Mental Ray is loaded. Once we save this out, it's going to auto load Mental Ray as our rendering engine every time we start a new scene. Once you've got this set up as well, you can change any of your defaults. So under final indirect illumination, you may want to up your precision results for the final gather. Under the render itself, you may want to increase the sampling size, anything like that. You can do, and it's going to save out for you to be the default. But that's all that I wanted to change for now, so just close that. Now this is a little tip. In your material editor, so just hit M to bring that up, or you can just click up here on this little icon. In your material editor, I recommend, even if you can set whether you want to use slate or compact as your default. I prefer to use slate, but I also don't like having all of this open. So basically I like to close out the navigator and close out the material map browser. This is mainly just because when I'm adding new things, I just right click, mental ray, add them in through the right click menu, and I don't need the navigator. It just takes up more room, especially when you're working on a limited screen resolution. So what I recommend though is, because this option isn't available, if you go into options preferences, the next setting that I'm going to change isn't actually available under the slate material editor. It displays in the slate material editor, but you can't change it. So basically, if you just close that out, go modes, compact material editor, then go under options, and under the material editor options, what we want to do is change our render sample size. At the moment it's set to 300, which is the default. I'm going to change that to 25. Now what that does is, the render sample size basically is what it displays in the viewport when it comes to procedural things such as noise and that. You may have noticed if you apply noise to a sphere in the viewport, and you're looking at it in the viewport, what it actually renders out is a lot different scale to what it displays in the viewport, and that's just down to this setting. So I changed that to 25. It means that we'll get a more accurate display in the viewport of what we're actually rendering size-wise when it comes to procedurals. So just hit apply, okay, and now you can change back to the slate material editor, and that setting's going to be saved, and it's going to be perfectly fine. That's pretty much all that I say change in the material editor. Now with our grid, our snap settings, if you right click that, it brings up this window where you can change your settings. I'll just leave it. I like to turn on vertex so that when you enable snap, it's snapping to vertexes by default. You can put on whatever you want, it's up to you. But under options, I like to enable snap to frozen objects. Basically it just does exactly what it says. When you've frozen an object, you can still snap points to it if you need to, which is great for when you've got some reference geometry in the scene and you want to be able to snap to it. So just close that out now. Now under your modifier panel, you've got, if you click this little button here, it says configure modifier sets. Now what this does is it basically gives you a bunch of shortcuts. So just hit configure. Gives you a bunch of shortcuts, little buttons that will be above your modifier set, so that when you've got commonly used modifiers, you can quickly select them and add them to the object. So I'm just going to add a couple in as an example. So let's see, I'll leave the mesh select. I'll move volume select up there. I'd like to add a edit poly, a delete mesh, FFD box, a symmetry. Let's go back to our displace, and a turbo smooth. These, like, obviously you can customize however many you want. If you want more buttons, you can add those in. Obviously you don't want to add too many, otherwise it cuts out room from your actual command panel itself to change the settings. So yeah, basically once you've got that customized the way you want, you can rename it. So I'm just going to call it Daniel's modifiers. Oops. It'd be helpful if I could spell, and just hit save. Okay, and now under configure modifier sets, you can hit show buttons. And now we've got these buttons up the top here, which are my quick access modifiers. So that's one way to help speed up your workflow. Now to save all of this out, basically what we're going to do is go to Customize, Save Custom UI Scheme. So basically all of the changes that we've made have now been saved. Will be saved. So if we hit Save Custom UI Scheme, the only thing is it only saves out your keyboard shortcuts, your application colors, your toolbars, everything that's basically under the Customize Preferences menu. So we want to save it as Max Start UI. And what this does is it makes 3ds Max load our custom preferences on startup. So just hit save. And yeah, so it's got our interface, face layout, our keyboard shortcuts, menus, our quad options, and our colors. So just hit OK. Now to save everything else that we've changed, such as adding these buttons in here, changing our configuring our viewport and whatnot. Basically what we need to do is save a scene. So if you just click on Save File, and under your default scenes directory, which is now in Program Files, Autodesk 3ds Max 2012/scenes, you just want to save a scene called max start.max. And just like the Max Start UI, this forces 3ds Max to load this scene on startup. And just hit save. So the great thing with that is you can add in, say you've got a lighting rig that you always like to use. You can add that in. You can add default objects if you wanted a plane to be set up as your ground plane all the time. Pretty much any settings that you can customize, you can save through there. So yeah, basically just feel free to play around, customize your own settings the way you want. This is just how I set my settings. Hopefully a couple of the items have given you a few tips on what can be a good thing to set up to make things a bit easier. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed. Just leave some comments if you don't understand anything, and I'll get back to you, but hope it's been helpful.